This video is for lesson 5-2, midpoint on the coordinate plane. Learning goals are to use inductive reasoning to determine the midpoint formula. Again, inductive reasoning is using examples to come up with patterns. And then we're also going to use that midpoint formula to find the coordinates of a midpoint on the coordinate plane. In the previous lesson, we defined midpoint as a point on a segment that divides it into two congruent segments. Follow the steps below to explore the concept of midpoint on the coordinate plane. So here's a coordinate plane drawn with the x-axis and y-axis. There are several segments on there. These segments have endpoints. So question 1, in the table below, write the coordinates of the endpoints of each segment shown in the coordinate plane. And so first is segment AB. And so for point A, that is at 2, 2, and I filled that in. Point B is over 2, up 6, and so I filled in 2, 6. And I've done the endpoints for all segments up there in that picture. Now it asks us for the midpoint. We can do this visually in most of these segments. So I think that this spot right here is the exact middle of segment AB. What are its coordinates? Well, it is over 2, up 4. The midpoint is 2, 4. Okay, what's the midpoint of segment CD? So just visually finding the center, how about right there? And that dot is 8, 7. And now the midpoint of segment EF. So the exact middle, how about right there? This is 5, 3. And finally, segment GH. That's right here. And it looks like the middle is this spot here. That's over at 11 and then up to 11, 2. So this chart contains the endpoints and also the midpoints of all of the segments on that graph. Now, number 2, use the coordinates in the table, here's the table, and compare the x-coordinates of the endpoints with the x-coordinate of the midpoint of the segment. Describe the pattern we see. So in the first row of the table, the x-coordinate of the midpoint is 2. Look at the x-coordinates of the endpoints, 2 and 2. What's the pattern? Well, it looks like they're the same. Let's look at the next row. The x-coordinate of the midpoint is 8. The x-coordinate of this is 5, and the x-coordinate of this is 11. What's the relationship of 8 to the number 5 and to the number 11? Well, 8 is the average of 5 and 11. 8 is midway between 5 and 11. 5 plus 11 is 16, and 16 divided by 2 is 8. Okay, let's look at the next one. The x-coordinate of the midpoint is 5. These x-coordinates are 4 and 6. 5 is the average of 4 and 6. And then the last one, that x-coordinate is 11. This x-coordinate is 8. This x-coordinate is 14. And 11 is the average of 8 and 14. 8 plus 14 is 22. 22 divided by 2 is 11. If we go back to the first row, yes, they're the same, but 2 is the average of 2 and 2. So here's the pattern. The x-coordinate of the midpoint is the average of the x-coordinates of the endpoints. Question B, compare the y-coordinates of the endpoints of each segment with the y-coordinate of the midpoint of the segment and describe the pattern we see. So looking in that same table, examining the y-coordinates, for example, let's look at the first row. This y-coordinate is 4. That y-coordinate is 2, and that one is 6. 4 is the average of 2 and 6, and that'll hold true for each row. So I wrote that out in purple. The y-coordinate of the midpoint is the average of the y-coordinates of the endpoints. Okay, number 3, use those two patterns to write a formula for the coordinates of the midpoint M of a line segment with endpoints at x1, y1, and x2, y2. So those patterns we wrote out in purple about finding the x-coordinate by averaging the x-coordinates of the ends? That's what we want to do here. To average two numbers, add them together, and divide by 2. Same for the y values. To average those y values, add them together, and divide by 2. So this formula uses variables to represent the numbers. When we actually do problems this year, we'll be substituting values in those variables. Question 4. Use your formula, so this one that we just wrote, to find the coordinates of the midpoint M of segment AC with endpoints at 1, 4, and 11, 10. So we're going to use that formula to find the ordered pair for M. We add the x coordinates together, the 1 plus 11, and divide by 2. And then add the y coordinates together, the 4 plus 10, and divide by 2. The way to say that is we're averaging the x and y coordinates. 1 plus 11 is 12, and 12 divided by 2 is 6. 4 plus 10 is 14, and 14 divided by 2 is 7. So I think that point M is at 6, 7. What can you conclude about segments AM and MC? So this gets back to that idea from a couple lessons ago, where if you draw the segment that it talks about, segment AC, and you locate M right in the middle, then what you can conclude is that that segment is congruent to that segment. Again, those little marks indicate that they're congruent. Next, we have some check your understanding questions, so I'll pause the video. In this video, we determined the midpoint formula. It's very straightforward. It involves averaging the x and y coordinates. We also used that formula to find the coordinates of a midpoint on a coordinate plane.